This slide deck was presented to the County Supervisors Association Board of Directors during the association's policy summit in October 2024. This recorded version is intended to provide important background to state-level decision makers regarding CSA's policy perspective on public pension systems. The presentation outlines several important points, including the history of pension reform, select efforts by employer groups to inform good policies by the PSPRS Board of Trustees, and the $1.1 billion investment of taxpayer resources invested by county governments to stabilize these systems. It closes with a summary of CSA's perspective on any proposed pension modifications, including an evaluation framework for state policymakers to consider. CSA's objective is to promote informed policymaking that supports public employees while ensuring efficient, effective investment of tax dollars. We're going to go on a little journey through time. The journey provides a brief history of the health of the public safety personnel retirement system during the events of the last 2 decades. The red lines moving across the chart are the funded status of the now closed public safety, corrections officers, and elected officials' legacy retirement plans. The fiscal years we are moving through are represented along the bottom. As a simple definition, a retirement plan's funded status is a measure of financial health that compares the value of assets currently in the fund to a calculated amount that should be in the fund to properly pay all the benefits in the future. 100% or more is ideal. We've started the history in 2007, a year before the start of the Great Recession and before any reform efforts. There were certainly meaningful benefit changes prior to this, for instance, the creation of a permanent benefit increase in the 90s that ended up having a profound impact on the funds. But as of 2007, you can see the systems were still in a relatively healthy position. However, it became a trend during the onset of the Great Recession to look not only at the funding problems, but also the underlying issues with pension systems nationwide. By late 2010, largely due to an investigation and report by the Arizona Republic, concerns about the structure and trajectory of the system were becoming known, and funded status was just beginning its downward spiral. Unfortunately, we were first recognizing the need for a change at the same time that public money was becoming scarce. The resulting budget impacts of a deteriorating funded status were only felt harder during these tight times, and as you'll see later in the case of EORP, led to some terrible long-term financial planning. By 2011, the legislature passed its first reform effort, making major changes that retroactively adjusted the permanent benefit increase, or PBI, to a less aggressive cost of living adjustment, or COLA, increased employee contribution rates, and created a new benefit tier, increasing the years of service required for normal retirement. Meanwhile, the funded status continued lower. In 2013, the legislature closed the new tier of EORP, created a defined contribution plan moving forward, and put an arbitrary cap on employer contributions. This limited short-term budget impacts, all the while piling up plan debt and exacerbating the decline in funding levels. The early reforms wouldn't last long. In 2014, the Supreme Court ruled that the change from a PBI to a COLA was unconstitutional for current retirees. And in 2016, similarly unconstitutional for current employees. PSPRS was ordered to retroactively pay the PBI and reimburse employee contribution rates. The response was continued decline to the funded status and continued increases in contribution rates. This financial pressure felt by stakeholders helped create the sentiment among lawmakers for another round of reforms. The League's task force on pensions created a yardstick to evaluate different proposals, the impacts of which can be seen in the current system. Then State Senator Debbie Lesko led a consensus of unions, employer groups, and taxpayer representatives to create Tier 3, the system we have today. Level dollar debt repayment, the COLA over PBI, and 50-50 cost sharing between employees and employers, all important tenets of cost control and the healthy employee-employer balance we have now, were put in place then. The changes stemmed the financial damage, but did nothing to address the debt left behind in the old legacy tiers. Corp reform followed a year later. Senator Lesko said then the change to a defined contribution structure mapped the benefit to the unique characteristics of the corrections personnel group, most specifically the shorter average career length. Both PSPRS and corp reforms passed through the chambers of the legislature with supermajority votes. The last major court ruling came from the Superior Court to the state in 2017 and 18. Ordering the removal of the EORP rate cap that was put in place in 2013. The EORP contribution rate necessarily almost tripled. Ongoing relief to counties was sought and secured in the state budget to reduce some of the lasting fiscal impact. By 2018, all of the reforms and major challenges have happened, and yet we couldn't turn the page. It became more obvious when we closed the old plans and created new ones, the mountain of debt that had been accumulated. For the previous decade, resources were siphoned away from other investments in public safety. As an example, the County Supervisors Association did a case study with Mojave County around the same time. It looked at a full cost of a sheriff deputy in 2008 and again in 2018. The total cost rose over 60%. While the deputy's salary didn't change more than 5% in that 10-year period. 2019 marked the beginning of the recovery. A new actuarial firm was brought in and immediately identified major issues, including a construct making repayment of plan debt much more costly. The hiring of a new administrator and changes within the PSPRS Board of Trustees were probably even more important. A new stakeholder process was created, leaning heavily on cost modeling, and all of these events allowed for aggressive changes that saved over $1 billion. The County Supervisors Association was not just tasked with working with PSPRS and stakeholders on changes to processes and repayment structures, but also to build the capacity to help the counties help themselves. For the last 5 years, modeling individual county repayment options, meetings with bond counsel, and educating supervisors and management teams on financial paths forward have become regular business. This led to more than $1 billion in additional contributions toward the existing legacy debt from counties alone. And here was the result. The funded levels rose dramatically. But context and situational awareness are important too. The blue bars represent an accumulating amount of Arizona County pension bond debt issued through the same fiscal years. And the white bars an accumulation of total additional contributions made by counties to the system. Counties put more money in, but mostly through debt issuance at historically low interest rates. The funds obviously look better. New tiers are very well funded, and legacy plans have improved and stabilized. But we also need to keep in mind the fact that counties are carrying much of that debt still on their own books. The rapid turnaround has led some to feel as though we are finished. We only finished putting the plan in place. Given all of this history and acknowledging the work that still needs to be done, you'll find here the perspective and framework that has been the county lens for evaluating changes for years. The one piece to pay specific attention to is the idea that any suggested change moving forward should have a demonstrated value to the taxpayer as part of the proposal. The goal is to make it more unlikely that we repeat the mistakes from the past. Thank you for your time.